Welcome to the Disneyland with Kids podcast, where we help you plan your vacation in 30 minutes or less. Wondering what is currently open at Disneyland Resort? What special procedures are in place? Be sure to join our email list to stay up to date on all the changes. Join now at disneylandwithkids.info. On this episode of the Disneyland with Kids podcast, we are talking about the many changes to the Disneyland Resort as it continues its phased reopening. I am Becca with This Crazy Adventure Called Life.
And I'm Leslie with Trips with Tykes.
All right, Leslie, we're kind of flying by the seat of our pants here today because we both just finished up a trip to Disneyland. And then you got home and hopped back on a plane and are recording from Northern Carolina, right?
Yeah, I'm all the way across the country and near Charlotte, North Carolina. And it's been quite the whirlwind to go from Southern California to the South, and then I'm going up to New England next. So I'm just all over now.
Oh, man. But I bet it feels great to be traveling again.
It does. It's something, that is just core to my being. Disneyland travel is part of it, but I do all sorts of travel, so I'm glad to be back at it.
Yeah, and I know I was really excited to get back in the parks, and it was your actually third time back in the parks since they reopened. But this visit was a lot different than the two previous visits because a lot of changes happened during your last trip to Disneyland. And that's what we're going to talk about today is Disneyland moving forward. California has removed their restrictions on theme parks. And so we're going to talk about everything that's happening and what guests can expect if they choose to visit the Disneyland Resort this summer.
That's right. So let's go ahead and let people know when we both were there so they can get a sense of sort of how things are going and what's going to be happening going forward. So when were you there, Becca?
I was in the area June 12th through 19th, but I was officially in the parks June 15th through the 18th. And you?
I was in the parks June 14th through the 16th. So I was there. If the June 15th date means anything to you, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners and group members know, that's when California reopened. So I was there for the last day of pandemic restrictions and the first 2 days of reopening. Quite the change.
It definitely was. So let's go ahead and start with the fact that as of June 15th, the biggest change for a lot of our listeners is that out-of-state guests were finally allowed to visit Disneyland. Up until now, from when they reopened on April 30th until June 14th, it was only California residents that were allowed to visit the parks. So that is a big change. And I feel like a lot of people didn't go quite on June 15th, but there was several out-of-staters there that I ran into. Did you notice a big difference in the crowds from the 14th to the 15th?
I really didn't. And I did. I'm a talker and I talk to people in line. So I was always asking people where they were from. And for the most part, it still was Californians on the first couple of days. And part of that was just because most of the reservations did get snagged up early before we even knew if that June 15th was going to be the date that out-of-staters were allowed back in. So it was still mostly Californians. I did meet a couple people from, Utah and Arizona, but I think that's going to be ticking up. A lot of people did not want to risk, you're a diehard and I knew you were hoping to get there as soon as possible, but a lot of people didn't want to risk having to reschedule their family vacation. So they played it a little safe and, maybe scheduled for a July or August vacation.
Yeah. In fact, this was probably the fourth vacation I had made reservations for. Of course, the other ones I canceled because I didn't go because I wasn't allowed. But I had this well before they announced the June 15th date was official, just in case. So I feel that was mostly true. I noticed a big change in what hotels were available. Originally, I was planning to go June 22nd, which is this week. And then we went a week earlier, decided, we're going to go for it. And there were a lot more hotels available. So I think this is the first week that people really felt comfortable maybe planning that vacation. And so it'll be interesting to see if those crowds start ticking up and becoming more crowded, and if the balance changes from mostly Californians to mostly out of state.
Yeah, that's right. I think a lot of Californians did get their fix in those early couple of weeks, especially Southern Californians. So, I think we will see a shift as the summer goes along. And then probably we'll be back to locals in the fall more
Yeah,
often than not. So
hopefully, I mean, but we don't know because it also depends on what they announce as far as a loyalty program, annual pass type membership, because that no longer exists right now at Disneyland. So there could be a
exactly.
lot of changes.
Everything is a question mark right now. That's the one thing
Yeah,
we've learned from these last 18 months is, you plan and then, your plans will get tossed out the window and you got to be cool with that. So we've been flying by the seat of our pants and I guess we've gotten used to it by now, right?
right. Speaking of flying by the seat of your pants and constant changes, let's talk about just getting inside of Disneyland, past security and all of that, because wow, that has been an ever changing, like every day that I went, it was different. And
Yes.
I know you saw that over, there are three entrances. There's the Harbor Boulevard entrance, which is where most people that walk from the hotels come in. There's the Mickey and Friends and Pixar Pals parking structure where you go through security there and then you walk the tram route. And then there is also the downtown Disney entrance. And so let's just kind of talk about downtown Disney was pretty steady and similar. I think the parking structure was as well. But let's talk about Harbor Boulevard and what you were seeing over there the 14th, 15th, and 16th.
Wow, each day was a new adventure. So the 14th had, quite the long line, but it very much had been what I had experienced in my previous two visits leading up to the, reopening of the state. They had a socially distanced queue. It wrapped around along those shuttle areas where, Art and the hotel shuttles usually drop off. And then it went sort of down the side of Harbor towards Disney Way. And it was
Mhm.
very civilized on the first day on June 14th, the last day before reopening. And, it was distance, but it was long, but it moved. And, we got into the parks early. We were able to go to Disneyland and ride 7 rides before 9:45. It was pretty fantastic. But then June 15th happened and it was just a complete free for all with I think the bottom line was there were a lot more people staying in the Harbor Boulevard hotels for
Mhm.
that June 15th opening, which made the line that much longer. And I've honestly never seen operations at Disneyland as crazy as they were on that side on June 15th. I mean, people were cutting in line because the line was snaking up and down that side of Harbor and it was going on forever. People were cramming in. People were starting to yell at each other. The line's that way. You're cutting me. It was crazy and not a cast member in sight. And it was so bad that I knew it wasn't going to repeat itself. I mean, because Disney doesn't do stuff like that very often. And by
Yeah.
June 16th, it was immensely better. So
I'm glad they got that fixed. They do still seem to be making minor adjustments. We heard over this weekend people saying, oh, they've got me past security and then they moved us over to downtown Disney for another line to wait in. Or one day I came in through downtown Disney, I got to the picnic area, put our stuff away, and when I came out of the picnic area, I noticed that there was a cast member stopping everyone that was walking the tram route and not letting them into the Esplanade, even though you had the people from the downtown Disney entrance in the Esplanade and lining up for the
mm,
parks. So it seems like they're still kind of working out how this is going to work. And then, of course, they also threw in the opening of this Toy Story lot um, on Friday as of the June 18th as well. So they have security going there and dropping people off in a little bit different area and I think it's just going to take a while to get it fine tuned and they're going to have to constantly adjust this and hopefully Disney won't have another day like June 15th.
yeah, I don't think we're going to return to that, but it is going to be a moving target. And as they see what works, and as we say, as the mix of guests change, then that could change where people are coming from. I mean, right now, it sure does make sense to me to stay on the downtown Disney side. There's that new Westin that just opened where the
Mhm.
Annabella Hotel used to be. And of course, now the Disneyland Hotel is going to be opening, and Paradise Pier's already open. So maybe that side makes sense if, of course, if it's in your budget and, fits what your family's needs at those hotels. I might more strongly consider those in
Yeah.
the not too distant future right now.
Yeah, in fact, we stayed ours is a little farther walk. I don't think most people would want to walk it, but we stayed at the Spring Hill main gate on Ball Road. By the last day, we were all pretty tired, so my husband drove us and dropped us off at the downtown Disney entrance, and then he drove back and he walked it himself. But
Oh,
it was really great and nice, and we never had to wait for security. So if you're going in the near future, that seems to be the one that's very steady. It's not changing things up as much. And so that might be a great way to go into the park.
that's right. But, I will say that things on Harbor were much better even by the 16th. I mean, they did open things quickly. They got us into the Esplanade. They opened the gates at the parks. We went to Disneyland on June 16th. They got us into Disneyland, and then they got us down to Rope Drop, which is new and back at Disneyland only.
Yes, let's
So,
let's talk
yeah,
about that because I went in on June 15th. We got there so early because we'd heard, they're opening up the parks. They're letting people just walk around and even operating rides. And like you just said, you'd done what, 7 rides by 9:45 and the park
yeah.
officially opened at 9. So we got there early, kind of expecting this on June 15th. And on June 15th, you were in California Adventure and I started in Disneyland. And I get there and they have the ropes up and we couldn't go anywhere. And I was like, what is this? Why? And they brought back the traditional rope drop. And it was the first day that there was no social distancing markers. And it was the first day, and we'll get to masks in a bit. That was gone. But it was kind of like a shock for me because everything up until this point had been 6 feet apart everywhere, even in downtown Disney. And I got to rope drop and there's like no distancing in place at all. And the people that are trying to distance themselves, you have other people that felt comfortable not distancing themselves, kind of like cutting in to get closer. And it was different, but yeah. They didn't do that over at California Adventure, though, I heard.
Yeah, that was not our experience. We got in, of course, after what would have been rope drop at California Adventure on the
Mhm.
15th, so we didn't see it. But thus far, they haven't been doing it over there. But I have to say, and this is definitely a word of warning to folks who just aren't yet comfortable being in with big crowds. I wasn't fully comfortable with the rope drop experience at Disneyland because, like you said, people were I was near the front, and people were trying to leave space and be courteous, and then the latecomers, I mean, I was there fully 30 minutes in advance, and people coming into the park 5 minutes before 9 o'clock were pushing through the whole crowd and filling all the space and, cutting. And it wasn't super magical, I have to say. And then, of course, you're standing much closer to people than you had intended. So that's something, to keep in mind. If that is not your cup of tea, then maybe you want to be after 9 o'clock to just sort of miss that whole thing.
And I will say another interesting thing, and we'll get into virtual queues here in a minute, that was interesting to me is that even though they were doing rope drop and not letting us in the parks till officially opened, our boarding group was called before official park open for Rise of the Resistance on Friday, the last day we were there. So that was interesting to me. And I wonder if maybe that's a sign that they're going to loosen that rope drop for a little while and or if it's a sign that they just didn't communicate to another department that they weren't letting people in there because we had to report by 9:11 and rope drop was at 9 and they were like, okay, we'll try. So
Oh, that's really interesting. That is really interesting. One hand not talking to the other quite yet, but I imagine with Disney that won't happen for too long.
no. All right, so let's talk about the mask because we did mention that social distancing was gone. So as of June 15th, all restrictions, social distancing, capacity limits, and the mask mandate in California, which has been in place probably longer than any other state and a stricter mask mandate than most states. I mean, you had a governor that was saying that you needed to wear even basically by yourself outside going for a walk in your neighborhood. So all of a sudden that was lifted and it felt really sudden. They announced it the day before that, once that was they knew that this was going forward and they didn't do it a little bit of time. They just said, okay, vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask at all. And those age 2 and up who are not fully vaccinated, please wear one inside. Of course, I have to say they are not enforcing that at all. But tell me your thoughts as someone from California that up until that moment was still expected to mask almost everywhere.
It was quite the shock, I have to say. And I did, ask my followers on Instagram, a lot of whom are Californians or, from coastal big cities where they've masked a lot more than maybe the rest of the country. And I got a lot of negative feedback, a lot of people who were very upset, several people who canceled some vacations, for
Hmm.
even one who canceled a vacation for the next week because of it. Because I think all of us were thinking, because, Disneyland had said, up until 24 hours before that they were going to be requiring masks, I think that they thought we were going to get a step down, that maybe they would not require masks outdoors and then see how that went for a week or two or three and then step down again. And instead, it was just immediately going to matching Walt Disney World's policies in a single day. And, a lot of us were like me, we're in the middle of a trip, and so you don't really get a choice at that point in time when you've
Yeah.
flown down. And so it was shocking as a Californian. And, of course, there are plenty of people who are happy about it. That's, they're vaccinated and they feel comfortable. And, I would have felt comfortable personally. It made me a little skittish having one child that was too
Yeah.
young to be vaccinated, knowing that he would be surrounded by, unmasked people of unknown status. So it was shocking and it was disorienting, but ultimately I felt it went okay. It turned out to be
Hmm.
better than I expected, because honestly, so much at Disneyland is outdoors.
Yeah.
And so that I didn't feel like I ever was in a lot of tight enclosed indoor spaces for any sort of a period of time, and it ended up being okay. There were a few places, like I said, at Rope Drop and especially at some of the Avengers Campus character shows where things
Mm.
were too tight for a long, a static period of time, with a lot of people in there.
Yeah.
But other than that, I mostly was comfortable, believe it or not.
Yeah. So I came from a state that, we had dropped our mask mandates. Well, we never had one, but the city I live in had one, and they dropped it when the CDC guidance changed, which was several weeks ago. And so we'd had that time to adjust. And I feel that's a big part of it. Like for the first few weeks that our mask mandate changed, almost everyone's still masked indoors. And it just took us a long time to adjust. And I think, Californians, you've had this mandate much longer, much stricter. And to just suddenly have it changed like that it was jarring here where I live. And so I can imagine how jarring it was in California. But like you said, a lot of it's outdoors. And I would say about the first day, about 25% of people were still masked, both indoors and outdoors in the morning, but it was a hot and humid day. And by midday, I would say that was probably down to about 15% masked outdoors.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think the heat made everybody kind of have to get comfortable with it faster, because it was really oppressive on those first couple of
Yes.
days, and everybody was just kind of suffering even without the masks on, with the unusual heat there. And so that did sort of, you were almost so hot you didn't have time to worry with whether somebody next to you was wearing a mask or not. You were just
Yeah.
trying to get through. But I will say that I did see, I guess, better mask compliance by kids of, too young to be vaccinated indoors than I have at least heard reported out of Walt Disney World. My understanding at Walt Disney World is that almost no children are wearing masks anymore. And I would say I saw close to 50-50 children indoors those first couple of days. And often their parents were masking along with them.
Mhm.
Probably, I did that with my 7-year-old just to support him. And I mean, it wasn't really fair to him to have to mask and nobody
Yeah.
else, none of the grown-ups had to. But I mean, I think that will decline over time, because people
Yeah.
are coming from places where they've had time to get used to it. Californians
Mhm.
are now having time to get used to it. So
Mhm.
if you're curious as to sort of what to expect, but I saw almost no adults wearing masks indoors unless they were with children who were masked.
Yeah. So we kind of were on the fence. Were we going to mask with our kids or not? Because all three of mine are too young to be vaccinated, and we ended up not masking with them, which is weird because at home we've always masked when we've gone in a store with them. We've only gone unmasked once when we're alone. But my husband's like, it's so hot, I don't want to mask, and he was kind of, and our kids have been masking and unmasking at school, so they were very used to having to put it on and take it off and put it on and take it off. And my husband's just like, I'm not going to keep track of a mask. And my kids were actually okay with it. My oldest, who has wanted to be part of a vaccine trial and stuff, he was kind of on this, can we just lie and say I'm 12 because I'm 11? And I was like, no, bud, we can't. And so they did pretty good though. I don't think they minded. In fact, one of my 6-year-old twins, he would often forget he had his mask on and wear it outdoors. So they didn't seem to mind, and they didn't seem to care that we weren't masking with them, but that's about where it's at. And of course this will continue to change. While we were in Disneyland, Cal OSHA, who had previously said that workplaces had to have everybody masked until everyone was vaccinated, kind of walked back a bit on that. And so we may see that cast members who are vaccinated get to start unmasking soon, but we'll have to just watch what happens there. So let's get to some topics that have nothing to do with masks and social distancing and pandemic life because
Thank
I'm kind of
goodness.
over it. Yes. Let's talk about the other huge thing to think about when you are planning a Disneyland vacation right now, and that is virtual queues.
Oh goodness.
Oh,
I've been living and breathing this and having nightmares about it and having them wake me up in the middle of the night leading up to my vacation. So, yes, virtual queues. There basically is a virtual queue that you have to consider every day on your Disneyland vacation right now. There's a virtual
yeah.
queue for Rise of the Resistance in Galaxy's Edge
Mhm.
at Disneyland, and there's a virtual queue for Web Slingers in the new Avengers campus.
Yes.
So,
And
what are your thoughts,
yeah.
Becca?
You know, I'm not to toot my family's horn or anything, but we kind of rocked at this virtual queue thing. I think I was my family. I shouldn't say I. My husband did it though. I think we were the first person that we'd heard of to get both queues in one day. And I don't
Yes.
know whether
Mhm.
that's like a testament of how great we were at getting queues, or if it's that Disney's made some changes to queue sizes or how many queues they're assigning in the morning. But up until June 15th, we hadn't heard of anyone getting in both queues at the same time. I mean, I'm sure it had happened, but we had never personally, as a Disney with Kids co-founding group, heard of someone doing it. And now it seems to be it's kind of getting common among at least us four to be
Right.
able to do that. I have I have okay thoughts with it. I mean, it's nice to have that virtual queue first thing in the morning, but I will tell you the first day we did Rise of the Resistance first, and we were like group 13. And it wasn't bad. We got there, we got in and they called us like 30 minutes after park opening or something like that. But on our second day in the parks, we start California Adventure, and this was the day that I scored, and I did it. I keep bragging to my husband, but I scored group 1 for Web Slingers. And um, it was hard because they called our group long before park opening. We'd let our kids sleep in a little bit because, we didn't want to wake them up and then us not have to be there early. We were tired. And it was kind of hard. We had to be in line for Web Slingers by 9:05, and the parks don't even technically open until 9. So, I had mixed thoughts about it, but you can't like try it's impossible to try and time to get a later. You can't be like, "Oh, I don't want group 1. I'd rather have group 20." You can't do that because they go so quickly. And yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with them. So,
Yeah, I'm with you too. I mean, that's really important to realize because everybody thought, oh, the 7 a.m. time is much more civilized because you're not trying to race and get into the park and then get a queue while you're inside the park. But it does make it really hard to plan your morning with kids
mhm.
because you might want to let them sleep and then do you race and get them up and how far away are you staying? Do you have time to do that? It really does make it hard. And do you have a lunch reservation? Is it going to get called while you're at lunch?
Yeah.
Uh, I don't love the way you lose some flexibility in your Disneyland day. And
Yeah.
the other thing I don't love, and this is something I really want to get out to folks who listen to us and who follow our group, is I mean, you and I and Jessica and Julie, we are experts. We do this all
Mhm.
the time. We have done this many times. I went 4 for 4 in getting a virtual queue because I have done this so many times and know all the hacks. And you got boarding group one because same thing.
Mhm.
This is not going to be the experience of the average guest. And there
No.
are a lot of average guests who are disappointed because they can't get in the queue at all.
Yeah.
Please do follow our group for tips because we're going to give you the best chance that we can give you as non-experts to get into those groups. But realize that this is not an entirely fair system to the casual
Right.
Disneyland visitor. And I don't love that about it. And I think it's important to prepare yourself and more importantly your children if they have their heart set on an attraction. And
Mhm.
you know don't let it wreck your Disney day because there is still tons. I mean, like I said, I had nightmares about it, but I was like, you know what, if we don't get to ride web slingers, we're going to have a grand Disneyland vacation. We would have even if we hadn't ridden it. I
Yeah.
promise.
Yeah, and in fact, we had a member of our group, and she's watched my lives, and she's followed our group, and she just posted today in there that she tried at both 7 and at noon and couldn't get a web slingers, and I felt so bad for her. She's a very active member, and she just didn't lock those in. And in fact, we took friends that are very casual. I do all the planning. I did all the virtual queues and everything, and they're like, what about these people that don't know how to do this stuff? And I'm like, well, that's what my job is. And they're like, yeah, but there's people that haven't found you and your Disney Kids co-founders, and they're gonna show up and not know how to ride these rides. So definitely if you are listening, you need to get on our websites and listen to the Avengers podcast, campus podcasts that we did, and really get to know how this works. Because if you want to do, especially Rise of the Resistance, because that one has absolutely no standby queue. Web slingers, we've heard rumors of people being able to get in a standby line at night with it, but Rise of the Resistance, this is your only chance to ride that, and it's a little stressful, and it's making me feel a little bit more like we're at Walt Disney World than Disneyland at sometimes.
Absolutely. It does have definitely seems a lot more like Disney World with all the planning that's got to be done now and all the sort of planning out of your day and logistics. So if
Yeah.
you've done that before, then you're well prepared for Disneyland these days.
Yeah. So before we get, close up and stuff, there's one more topic I want to touch on, and that is crowds, because there are a lot of people right now that are still, do I want to go right now? Do I want to wait? Because we don't have fireworks, although those are coming back on July 4th. We don't have parades. We have a lot of things that are still closed, food wise and shop wise. And so there are a lot of people that just aren't sure if this is the right time for them to go to Disneyland, but the crowds may be that deciding factor. And I want to try and stay away from things like the terms crowded and empty, because those are, I feel that those are opinions, because one man's crowded as another man's empty. But as far as crowds, like, I felt I had room to breathe. Does that make sense? I never felt super crowded except in Avengers Campus. Let's just get that out there. That's a whole other issue. But how did you feel about the crowds as someone that's gone a lot to Disneyland?
Well, I felt like it was a constantly moving target, being on the dates that I was on. The 15th felt tight to me because they hadn't worked out the operations yet.
Mhm.
So there were choke points still. And the 14th felt in some ways like there were big crowds in certain places, like along the terraces in New Orleans Square, because that was where the socially distanced queue was for pirates. But that
Mhm.
wasn't really a crowd. It was just kind of a choke point with all these people
Yeah.
standing 6 feet apart, and that of course went away by the 16th when I was in the park again. So it really is a moving target. I do feel like the wait times for the rides are very reasonable right now. And
Yes.
once they were able to remove the social distancing and they were able to fill, all the rows on a boat like on Pirates, that the queues did move quite quickly. I feel
Mhm.
like right now it's kind of a sweet spot, but I do know they're going to be increasing capacity in the coming weeks. So this is
Yeah.
going to creep up. But of course, the flip side is they'll be opening more restaurants and more
Yeah.
things to do. So it didn't feel oppressive to me
Yeah.
in my long experience with Disneyland over the years.
Yeah, I thought it was great. I felt like, the first 2 days, or by the 3rd night, I was just done and tired at the end of the night, so I didn't put this on my stories, but I listed all the rides that we did each day, and, we were doing 20 rides per day at least. I mean, we did every single ride in the parks except for we didn't do the teacups, that were open, I should say. And I feel like there was one other one I said that we didn't do. Oh, Casey Jr.'s train. We didn't do that. So other than that, we got everything done. Some things we did multiple times, and it was a really great visit. And I have said it, I would pay, and I shouldn't do this because you said this about Max Pass, and then what happened? Price went up, but I would gladly pay $20 more per day per ticket to keep the crowds at this level, because I just thought it was a great spot. It was just really nice.
Yeah, I agree. It was, and I would say especially at Disneyland for me, I thought
Hmm.
DCA was a little bit more difficult to sort of find a short ride. There's just fewer rides there. So I
Yeah.
think that's going to be the park that feels the crunch of increased capacity first. So
Yeah.
just keep that in mind as you choose your
Especially
parks.
Yeah, especially for rides, because
Yeah.
and the rides that are there, there's some that are very popular, like Toy Story Midway Mania and Guardians of the Galaxy, but then, like, Incredicoaster only had, like, a 7 to 10-minute wait every time we went on it. So
Yep, same for us. We got on Incredicoaster a lot, and we never got on Toy Story Midway Mania. It was broken down the one morning that we
oh,
were in the
no.
park over there. That's all right. We got to do Web Slinger, so we got our shooter ride, right?
Right, exactly. So, Leslie, that kind of brings me to our would you rather that we always end with here on the Disneyland Kids podcast. And this one might be a little hard for you because I know how much you love both of these scenarios. So, Leslie, would you rather keep the low crowds like we have had this last week, but not bring back Fast Pass or Max Pass? Or would you rather see an increase in crowds but bring back those, Fast Pass and Max Pass options?
Ooh, that is really, really hard for me, Becca. uh, you know, honestly, I'd rather bring back Fast Pass and Max Pass because
Oh
I
my
do I
gosh.
do miss my hacking because even though the lines were low, I still was getting more rides done with Max Pass, knowing what I know about Max Pass back in the day on a higher crowd day. So yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I'm ready for the crowds like right now, but not here in June, but maybe in a few months, I want Max Pass back. What about you?
Okay. I'm the exact opposite. I love Fast Pass. Max Pass, I'm like, "Yeah, I'll do it just because, my husband doesn't wanna run to the Fast Pass machines." But, um, I just didn't see a need for it with other than a few select rides. I didn't see a need for it with the crowds this low because the lines were so low, and I think I'd prefer this and not feeling crowded and feeling like I can let my kids walk a little farther without having to hold their hands constantly than to have those back. So, we're split on that one, I guess.
I guess so. Different strokes for different folks.
All right. That's all that we have time for today. You've been listening to Leslie and Becca discuss the many changes at the Disneyland Resort as they continue their phased reopening. Wondering what the current restrictions are or what's currently open, be sure to join the Disneyland with Kids Facebook group where we will give you all of the info and more. And we'll see you real soon.